Hi guys, so today we're going to do a revision and we're also going to correct the activity from the book Frankenstein, okay? So first of all, our last content we saw some vocabulary and a grammar point, okay? Our vocabulary was the following. Repeat after me. To land. To take off. To fasten. An aisle. A seatbelt. A passenger. Speed. Swedish. Departure. Arrival. Hawaii. Sweden. Lounge. Jet lag. A seat. Swiss. Switzerland. To carry on. To drop off. To see off. To speed up. Carry on luggage. To drive away. Okay guys, this was our vocabulary. We also saw a grammar point that was about tags, okay? So tags are either questions, statements, or imperatives added to a clause to invite a response from the listener, okay? Remember guys, if my sentence is positive, my tag is going to be negative. If my sentence is negative, my tag is going to be positive, okay? Victoria doesn't want to go to the cinema, does she? He has studied Italian before, hasn't he? Okay, you guys need to study tags. Later on we're going to do an activity, a classroom activity about tags, which is going to make it easier. But don't forget about it, okay? Keep studying it. Now, I asked you guys to read from chapter 1 to 4 of the book Frankenstein, okay? So, on our last live, which was our last, it was last Wednesday, I asked you guys to talk about, we started talking a bit about Frankenstein. I told you a bit about the story, at least what I knew about the story of how Mary Shelley came to write the book, okay? So there was that classic, very famous tale, how Mary Shelley, her husband, Percy Shelley, was not her husband at the time, if I'm not mistaken, and went to Lord Byron's house in Geneva, and they decided to do a challenge. They were reading ghost stories, very bored at home, and they decided to challenge each other to write a really great horror story, a really great ghost story. Mary Shelley had the idea of writing Frankenstein. It was not written in one day, in one night. It was a work that lasted a few years. And as I sent you guys some comic pages, sort of like comics, about how Mary Shelley came to write it. I hope you guys read it, and if you thought it was fun, I thought it was very funny. The whole idea of teenaging Mary Shelley, because she was quite young. Anyway, the story of Frankenstein. We talked a little bit about it. You guys said some interesting things. Some of you already knew a bit about the story before we started reading it. There was one of you said Frankenstein wasn't the monster, it was the doctor. And I said Frankenstein wasn't the doctor, it was the college dropout. Which is a bit of a sentence born out of anger from me, but you guys know how it is. So Frankenstein, we're used to imagining that monster with boats on his head and who looks like a zombie and walks really weird and stuff and just doesn't properly speak. The book shows us otherwise. Chapter 1 to 4, we see Victor Frankenstein, the young man who later became a scientist and decided to create his own creature. We begin the story through the eyes of another person, Robert Walton, who was an explorer going to the Arctic. He encounters Victor Frankenstein, who was chasing someone, and Frankenstein tells his story to Walton. So we get the idea of, through his eyes, how it was to grow up and have all these aspirations to become a scientist. Anyway, let's start. Our activity number 1 talks about how did Elizabeth end up living with Frankenstein and his family. Elizabeth, as we know, is a young girl who grew up with Victor's family. He treats her like a cousin, although he has some affection beyond family for her. And she came to his family through his mother. His mother had a period of her life where she spent poor. Her father lost everything he had, and she was very poor. She met Victor's father, and he helped her get out of that situation after her father died. So when she met a poor family who had a little girl with them who wasn't their child, who was an orphan, something touched her. She felt like she understood Elizabeth's situation one way or another. So she decided to adopt her, so to speak. She brought Elizabeth into her home and raised her almost as her own child. Elizabeth treated Victor's mother and father as uncle and aunt. And Victor was like a cousin to her. Although, as I said, they had some romantic affections for each other. So this was how she ended up with the Frankenstein family. What subject did Frankenstein become interested in studying at university? This is a complicated question because Victor's story, when he was a child, he says he was really drawn to the alchemists. As we know, alchemists like Agrippa are not really considered scientists these days. We are not very, we don't believe really in the whole fountain of youth, philosopher's stone kind of situation. Science went beyond that. So the alchemists are not really what we believe when we think about science anymore. And back at Victor's time, that was also true. Alchemy was very old-fashioned. Nobody really believed in that. But he ended up reading books about alchemy, so he thought that was what it was all about, you know? Fountain of Youth, Philosopher's Stone. Very Harry Potter of him, but you know, Mary Shelley was the girl who started everything. So maybe she started Harry Potter. People are gonna kill me for that, but you know, it just happens. So he started reading about the alchemists. When he went to college, he was no longer believing in those things, but he spent a lot of time of his youth reading about it. Although in one period of his life, he began to feel interested about galvanism, because he saw a lightning that struck a tree. So he began to feel very interested in this whole thing of like galvanism and science beyond the idea of alchemy. When he got to college, he met a professor, Professor Krempe, and he was not very kind, as we know very well. There's even a question about Krempe being his favorite teacher, and we know that's not true. Victor was not very fond of Krempe because Krempe made fun of him for believing the alchemy at first. Even though we know he was a young child back then, Krempe still thought he wasted a lot of precious time that could have been spent studying real science. He was a natural philosophy teacher. Victor was not fond of Krempe. He decided, I'm not gonna go to his classes, I don't care, I'm not interested. But then he met Professor Waldman, and Waldman was a very interesting professor to him. Waldman was a professor of chemistry, and when Victor went to his lecture, his eyes just opened to a new thing. He began to feel very interested towards chemistry, and through Walden he started studying natural science and mathematics. So we could say the subject he began interested in studying was chemistry through Walden, and we could also Waldman. I'm sorry, I'm totally butchering his name. Through Waldman, and we could also say in a way he began to study science in general, because Waldman really pushed him towards more than just chemistry, towards more than just what he wanted to see in science. So that's the idea. Then we have, what did Frankenstein decide to do after he studied a lot about the living body? How was it supposed to be? So after Frankenstein found out how to create life, which he doesn't tell us how he found out how to do that. I was interested in knowing. But he begins to work towards the idea of creating a living human being from scratch. So he decides he wants to bring life to a dead body, and he starts to put that body together. He expects it to be a beautiful creature, like something that he never imagined before. He mentions 2.5 meters tall and broad, which is the body he got to bring life into. So he wanted a very tall and very big creature. And then when the creature comes to life, he gets really scared, which is funny because, Victor, you asked for this. You decided he was going to be 2.5 meters tall. I mean, why are you so afraid, in a way? But this is the idea. He decides to create life, and he imagines his creature is going to be perfect. Again, if you want something that looks like human, don't make it taller than a human. One would expect someone as smart as Dr. Frankenstein would understand that concept. But, you know, who am I to say? I didn't even go to college. Didn't drop out of it too. Then, next question. How did Frankenstein feel after he finished his creation? Why? He felt horror and disgust because the creature seemed ugly to him. So once life was inside the creature and it woke up and started to open its eyes and try to speak, Victor saw only a monster. It's like before the creature was alive, he didn't imagine what it could be. He just thought it would be similar to a human, although it didn't look like a human. He spent the whole process so involved in creating life, he ignored the creature he was creating in a way. It was not real. It became real when life started. You know, when the creature came to life, it became real. And he was horrified. He was disgusted with what he created. He just hated what he created, really. And he ran off. Then we have number 2, which is read the sentences below and decide if they're true or false. Okay? So let's go. Frankenstein's little brother was born when he was 7 years old. Is that true or false? True. Frankenstein didn't like to read and study old writers like Cornelius Agrippa. True or false? False. He did study these old writers when he was a child. Frankenstein's mother died because she caught a bad illness. True or false? True. Elizabeth got sick and Frankenstein's mother decided to take care of her. Elizabeth got better, but his mother got worse. Her health really declined. Mr. Cramp, his professor of natural philosophy, was his favorite teacher. True or false? That's very much false. Mr. Waldman told Frankenstein that the knowledge of natural philosophy and mathematics were not important for a chemist. True or false? False. Waldman actually got Victor into these other subjects through chemistry because he said it was very important for a chemist to know natural philosophy and mathematics. Did not butcher his name this time. Frankenstein's developments at university were very fast and surprised other people. True or false? That happens to be true. He began to develop a very strong love for that kind of science, and he really succeeded. So people were very surprised that he succeeded that much, especially Mr. Crampit, because, you know, you wouldn't expect someone who started his love for science by reading The Alchemists to actually become good at real science. Frankenstein didn't think that he would bring back life after death someday. True or false? That's false, because everything he wanted to do was bring back life. It mostly came from the sadness that he felt from losing his mother. So he had this interest in bringing back life from the very beginning. When Frankenstein saw his old friend Henry Clerval at the inn, it brought him lots of bad memories. True or false? That is false. Seeing his friend Henry brought him really great memories in a period of time where he was very emotionally unstable. His friend Henry was the only person who took care of him when he was ill. True or false? True. Frankenstein became very ill when he saw the monster that he had created. So Henry was the only person he had there who could help him get back to top shape. His youngest brother William grew up to become a tall and attractive man. True or false? True. In a letter, Elizabeth mentions that William became a very tall and attractive young man when she sends a letter to Victor trying to understand how he was, if he was fine, and when she knew he had recovered, she was very happy about it. Match the words A to J to their respective meanings, synonyms. So, I'm going to write the order here. We have F, H, E, B, A, C, J, D, G. Okay, so chivalry means the good behavior of knights. To be eager is to want. Unpleasant is not nice. Misfortune is bad luck. Carefree is without worries. Enthusiasm, let me just find it, is great interest. Purpose is reason for doing something. Rush is to go quickly. Soak is made completely wet. And recovery is getting better. Okay? So, number 4. Number the sentences below from 1 to 10 according to what happens first. Okay? So I'm going to put the numbers here. We have 5, 2, 10, 4, 1, 6, 9, 7, 8. Okay, so first of all, Frankenstein's father married to a poor woman and young woman, which was Frankenstein's mother. Then Elizabeth became Frankenstein's best friend. Then Frankenstein left Geneva to go to the University of Ingolstadt. Then Mr. Krampus said that Frankenstein had wasted his time reading old writers. Then Frankenstein went to Mr. Waldman's first lecture about chemistry, and he felt interested about chemistry. Then Frankenstein became able to create movement in lifeless matter. The monster opened his mouth for the first time and made a strange sound. Frankenstein went out of his house terrified of meeting the creature at every corner. And then Frankenstein became ill and stayed in his bed for several months. And finally, Frankenstein received a letter from Elizabeth saying that she was happy with his recovery. Okay? So these were the activities about chapter 1 until chapter 4. I guess reading this book, just the first 4 chapters, gives us an idea that pop culture really did not understand Frankenstein, or at least didn't want to understand Frankenstein. It's not a monster with bullets in his head. We're still waiting to discover if he's indeed a monster at all. But his looks are not what we see in movies and what we see in pop culture these days. We're not talking about this weird creature with green skin. We're talking about a very, very tall creature with black hair, yellow skin, white teeth, and watery eyes, as Frankenstein describes him. reading this book, the idea is to understand exactly what Mary Shelley was trying to say. At least take your own conclusions about it. Some people see it as the story of a monster. Some people see it as the story of desperation. As I mentioned during our live, Mary Shelley was in a very tough period in her life. She ran away with Percy Shelley when she was very young. She lost a lot of her babies and she didn't have contact with her father. Percy was not at all faithful to her, although they seemed to love each other. And she was depressed. She was in a desperate state. Some people see it as a story of a desperate creature trying to find love. Others see it as a story of a monster. Now, who is the monster and who is the desperate creature? How can we know? Only reading it and taking our own conclusions. I want you guys to think about it. I want you guys to tell me in our next live, what do you think about Frankenstein's reaction to the creature? Do you think he was right in running away? Do you think you understand what he was thinking? Do you understand why he ran away and why he felt suddenly disgusted with his creature? I want you guys to give me your opinion on what you think about the novel thus far, okay? So this was our class. I hope you guys liked it. You can pause the video to write down the answers, okay? I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.